The bus terminal never sleeps. It only changes shifts. Wet boots, coffee breath, phones glowing in tired hands, a janitor drags a mop through a spill no
Keep
one
it steady.
claims. Overhead lights stutter once, then pretend they didn't. The security camera pivots, too slow. A patrol K9 walks clean and quiet through the crowd. Then he stops. Not curious, not confused, locked. The leash goes tight without a pull. The officer doesn't speak. He shortens his grip by 2 inches. His eyes don't go to the people. They go to the floor. Another light flickers. A vending machine hum deepens, like something under it answers back. Nobody notices. That's the problem. The call came at 12:41 a.m., the kind that didn't ring like an emergency so much as it tapped at the edge of your life. Polite, persistent, impossible to ignore. Officer Ethan Cole stared at the ceiling of his apartment for one extra breath before he moved, not because he was slow, because he was careful. That was the thing the job taught you when you survived long enough to stop being excited by sirens. You didn't leap. You didn't dramatize. You let the facts settle in your bones. Then you stood up with the quiet certainty of someone who knew how quickly a wrong step could become permanent. Shadow lifted his head from the rug beside the bed. Even in the dark, Ethan could feel the dog's attention lock onto him like a magnet clicking into place. Silent, total, ready. Shadow didn't bark, didn't whine. He simply watched, ears slightly forward, waiting for the first cue that would tell him what kind of night it was going to be. Ethan swung his legs off the bed, bare feet hitting cold floor, and reached for the uniform folded on the chair, like a ritual. The badge, the radio, the belt, each piece a weight that reminded him he still belonged to something structured, something that demanded he show up even when his life didn't feel like it had an outline anymore. His phone buzzed again, dispatch line blinking. He answered. Cole. Captain Maria Hayes's voice came through, low and clipped, not panicked, but tight in that way that meant she'd already heard the wrong details and was trying to keep them from spreading. Ethan, she said, you awake? I'm up. A pause. Hayes didn't waste words unless she had to. We've got a call out by Ridgeway, Old Mountain Transit Line, the one they sealed years back. Ethan's stomach tightened by a degree he didn't acknowledge out loud. He'd driven past the Ridgeway access road 100 times. Rusted gate, warning signs half peeled by weather. A place people pretended didn't exist because it was easier than admitting the mountain had been carved open and then abandoned when it stopped being profitable. What's the situation? Ethan asked. Multiple reports, Hayes said, flickering utility lights near the lower trailhead. Some guy swears he heard metal screaming from inside the tunnel. Another caller says there was a vibration under his porch, like a truck idling, but there was no truck. Ethan's eyes shifted to Shadow. Shadow had already stood, not excited, not anxious, just ready. Hayes continued. Utilities says they're not running power out there anymore. Public Works claims the seal is intact. They're pointing fingers. I want eyes on it before we get a bigger problem. Ethan listened to the cadence beneath her words. Hayes wasn't saying it, but she didn't like mysteries that involved public infrastructure in silence. Those were the kind that made headlines after someone got hurt. Copy, Ethan said. Shadow and I are en route. Bring Reed if you need him, Hayes added. But, Ethan, don't go hero mode. You see instability, you back out. That mountain doesn't care what your badge says. Ethan's jaw tightened. Understood. He ended the call, pulled on his boots, and clipped Shadow's harness with practiced hands. The dog leaned into him for one brief second, less affection than alignment, then moved to the door. Ethan paused at the threshold. His apartment was quiet in the way it always was now, after midnight. Too quiet. No second mug in the sink, no soft voice from the couch, no gentle question asking if he'd be safe. Dr. Lena Moore had been gone 8 months, and the world still felt like a room someone had walked out of without closing the door. He didn't let himself stand there. He didn't let the grief find a place to sit. He followed Shadow into the hallway, shut the door, and went to work. Ridgeway sat north of the city where the last strip of streetlights thinned into darkness and the road began to climb in long, patient curves. Pines leaned in close like they were trying to listen. Ethan's cruiser cut through the night with steady headlights. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, posture upright, eyes forward, breathing even. The dog's calm never felt like indifference. It felt like focus, like he was reading a book Ethan couldn't see. "All right," Ethan murmured, mostly to himself. "We take a look. We don't do anything stupid." Shadow's ears flicked once, as if the dog was answering, "That's your job." The access gate was still there, chained and half swallowed by weeds. Ethan parked on the shoulder, killed the engine, and stepped out into air that smelled like damp stone and cold resin. Silence pressed in, heavy. No wind, no insects, just the faint hum of the city far behind him, as if the world was holding its breath at the edge of the mountain. Ethan clicked on his flashlight. Shadow moved ahead, leash loose but controlled, paws quiet on gravel. The trailhead sign was old, the paint faded until it looked like a bruise. Ridgeway Transit Project, Phase 2. Phase 2 never happened. The mountain had been drilled and hollowed, and then, according to rumor, someone had decided the cost wasn't worth what they were trying to build. Ethan followed the trail down toward the lower mouth where the tunnel had been sealed. Halfway there, Shadow stopped. Not hesitated. Stopped. His body went rigid, tail still, ears pinned forward so hard they looked like they could cut air. The leash tightened, not from pulling, but from the dog locking himself into place. Ethan halted immediately. "What is it?" he whispered. Shadow didn't look back. He stared down the slope toward the sealed tunnel entrance like he was watching something invisible move through the ground. Ethan crouched slightly, eyes scanning. No movement in the trees, no figure on the trail, no flashlight beam. Just darkness and the outline of a concrete bulkhead at the bottom of the path. Then Ethan felt it. Not a quake, not a tremor you could point to and say, "There." More like a low presence. A vibration so subtle it felt like it belonged inside your bones instead of your ears. Ethan straightened. His breath stayed controlled, but his skin tightened. "Shadow," he said softly. The dog's head tilted a fraction, as if triangulating. Then Shadow took 2 careful steps forward and stopped again, posture even more tense, gaze fixed on the ground directly ahead of them. Ethan's flashlight beam swept over the trail. Gravel, pine needles, a few exposed roots. Nothing. But Shadow's reaction was not guesswork. He didn't spook. He didn't invent threats for drama. Shadow was the kind of dog who stayed calm in gunfire and barked at nothing only once, right before Ethan found a loaded weapon dumped in a ditch during a pursuit. "All right," Ethan breathed. "We don't push past what you're telling me." He moved around Shadow's left side, careful, scanning the ground for cracks, soft patches, anything that might indicate subsidence. The mountain slope here wasn't steep, but it was layered, soil over rock over old engineered cuts. The sealed tunnel mouth came into clearer view. Concrete wall, steel reinforcement, warning signs that were too new to belong to the original project. No trespassing. Hazardous structure, authorized personnel only. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Those signs hadn't been there last month. He was sure of it. He took 1 step forward. Shadow's harness shifted as the dog braced, muscles tightening, weight shifting backward. Subtle, but absolute. Shadow was telling him, "Not there." Ethan stopped. He felt the vibration again, a low thrum that rose for half a second, then faded. Like something deep underneath them was waking up and going back to sleep. Ethan pulled his radio. "Dispatch, Unit 12. Static, then a voice. "Go ahead." "I'm at Ridgeway Lower Trailhead," Ethan said. "Tunnel seal appears intact. New hazard signage present. I'm feeling a low-frequency vibration in the area. Any report of construction or equipment operating nearby?" A pause. "Negative, Unit 12. Utilities confirms no active feed. Public Works has no scheduled work orders." Ethan's eyes stayed on the sealed wall. "Copy." He crouched again, placing his palm flat against the ground. Cold gravel, and underneath, there, faintly, the same hum, not loud enough to hear, just enough to feel, like a heartbeat through stone. Shadow let out a quiet breath through his nose, not a growl, not a warning sound, something closer to a restrained note of concern. Ethan stood. "We're not going closer," he decided. He backed up slowly, keeping his body between Shadow and the sealed tunnel as they moved up the trail. Shadow followed without protest, but his head never stopped turning, reading angles, listening with ears Ethan couldn't compete with. Once they reached the gate again, the vibration faded like a thought slipping away. Ethan stood beside the cruiser, staring back into the trees. The mountain had secrets, and tonight it had made sure he noticed. Ethan filed the initial report before dawn, precise and boring on paper, because that was how you got people to listen. You didn't write "the mountain felt alive." You wrote "unidentified low-frequency vibration observed. New hazard signage present. Recommend inspection by appropriate agency." By 8:15 a.m., he was in Captain Maria Hayes's office. Hayes sat behind her desk with a coffee she hadn't touched. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight knot, and her eyes had that pragmatic, empathetic sharpness that made people feel both supported and examined at the same time. Shadow lay at Ethan's feet, calm now, chin on paws, but alert enough that his ears twitched whenever someone walked past the door. Hayes skimmed Ethan's report. "You're sure about the vibration?" "I'm sure Shadow was sure," Ethan said. Hayes's eyes lifted. "And your dog is smarter than half our equipment. That's not a compliment. It's a concern." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. Hayes set the report down. "Public Works says the seal is intact and safe. Utilities says no feed. They're telling me it's probably settling. Temperature shift. Wildlife." Ethan's jaw tightened. Wildlife doesn't put up new signage. Hayes studied him for a long moment. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." She leaned back, exhaling carefully. "Here's the issue. I can't start a multi-agency fuss over a vibration and a sign without something firmer. You get me something firmer, I can move." Ethan nodded once. "Understood." Hayes's gaze softened by half a degree. "Ethan, listen to me. Don't go poking around that site-off book. If there's an instability, I want you alive and I want you accountable." Ethan heard the unspoken part. "I can't protect you if you make this personal." He swallowed the first reply that rose in his throat. "Okay," he said instead. He stood, clipped Shadow's leash, and left. He made it to the parking lot before his phone buzzed with an email notification. Subject line, "Redevelopment Notice, Ridgeway Critical Infrastructure Clearance." His pulse didn't spike. It slowed. That was worse. He opened it. A formal document from the County Redevelopment Office. Scheduled clearing and demolition of sealed, non-operational transit infrastructure, commencing within days. Public-private partnership. Safety remediation. Site to be stabilized for future use. Attached was a list of legacy names connected to contractor records and trust permissions, and there, midway down the page, was Dr. Lena Moore. Ethan's breath left his lungs like someone had opened a valve. He stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Lena's name wasn't supposed to be on anything new. She was supposed to be past tense, a closed file, a memory he carried silently. His hands went cold. Shadow, sensing the shift, rose and pressed lightly against Ethan's thigh, grounding him. Ethan looked down at the dog, then back at the email. Demolition. Days. Lena's name. The tunnel vibration. The new hazard signage. A sequence forming. A system. And Ethan Cole had never been able to ignore a system once he saw the pattern. "All right," he whispered. Shadow's ears lifted. Ethan's voice hardened into something steadier than grief. "We're going back." He didn't call Hayes again, not yet, not because he wanted to go rogue, because he didn't have proof, and proof was the only language systems respected. Ethan drove to the county records office first. The place Lena used to joke smelled like paper that had given up on being remembered. It was a squat building with fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly tired and slightly guilty. He parked, stepped out, and felt Shadow's posture shift. Alert, scanning. Shadow didn't like crowded spaces, not because he was aggressive, but because he was always working. Ethan signed in, got the usual sideways glances. Uniform, K9. "Why are you here?" And asked for redevelopment files on Ridgeway. A clerk directed him to a public terminal because the world loved pretending that giving you access meant giving you power. Ethan sat, Shadow at his side, and started pulling documents. Permits, zoning, classification reports. Most of it was noise. Then the gaps appeared, inspection logs skipping years, routine tremor reports filed and closed with no follow-up, a reclassification that labeled the sealed infrastructure non-critical, despite the original project title having the word transit in it. And the strangest part, Lena's name wasn't on the construction side, it was on the analysis side. She'd been listed as a consultant years ago, attached to thermal and airflow assessment. Ethan's fingers hovered over the screen. Lena never told him she'd worked on anything like this. He'd known her as brilliant, and introspective, the kind of person who would stare at a blueprint like it was a poem. But she was also private. She kept parts of her work separate, not out of secrecy, but out of habit, like she didn't want her mind dragged down by someone else's opinions. Ethan had respected that. Now it felt like a locked door in his own house. He printed what he could. Then he called Deputy Lucas Reed. Reed answered on the second ring, breathless like he'd been jogging even if he wasn't. "Officer Cole?" "Lucas," Ethan said. "You on shift?" "Yes, sir." "I need a favor," Ethan said. "Not official, not yet. I need you to check something for me, quietly." There was a pause, then Reed's voice lowered. "Okay, what?" Ethan glanced at Shadow. "Ridgeway redevelopment. Find out if anyone moved the demolition schedule up. And I need any contact names for the crew supervisor." Reed didn't ask why, which Ethan appreciated. "Got it," he said. "Give me an hour." Ethan hung up, looked at the stack of printouts, and felt the outline of what he needed forming in his head. He needed to see the site again. Not just the sealed mouth, the perimeter, the seams, the places Shadow didn't want him stepping. If the mountain was warning them, Ethan needed to learn the language fast. He left the records office, and as he walked into the cold morning, Shadow fell into step beside him, silent, loyal, expressive in the smallest ways that mattered. Ethan didn't talk to God, didn't bargain with the universe. But as he opened the cruiser door, he found himself thinking of Lena's handwriting, the way she used to leave him notes folded into perfect squares. He didn't know what this was. He only knew it wasn't random. And he didn't walk away from systems that threatened to collapse on people. Not anymore. The road back to Ridgeway looked different in daylight. Not friendlier, just more honest. The mountain showed its scars when the sun hit it the right way, old cut lines where machinery had bitten into stone, unnatural slopes where soil had been dumped and re-leveled, trees that grew in crooked patterns because roots had learned to avoid what humans buried beneath. Ethan drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near Shadow's harness, buckled out of habit. Not petting, not comforting, just keeping contact with something real. Shadow sat upright, watching the world like a surveyor. When they reached the access gate, Ethan saw fresh tire tracks in the dirt shoulder, wide, heavy, recent. The kind of tread that didn't belong to hikers or Forest Service pickups. He parked, shut off the engine, and listened. Silence. But now he knew silence could be manufactured. Shadow hopped down first, paws landing soft, head lowering immediately to catch scent. His tail stayed neutral, not wagging, not stiff, working. Ethan unclipped the leash from the short loop and switched to the long line, giving Shadow room but keeping control. "Slow," he murmured. Shadow didn't rush. He moved like a professional, methodical, mapping the space without needing a clipboard. The trail toward the sealed tunnel mouth looked the same as last night, but the air felt different. Less cold, more tight, like pressure building beneath a lid. Halfway down, Shadow paused at the same spot as before, ears snapping forward, body locking. Ethan stopped instantly and followed the dog's gaze. The ground ahead looked unchanged, but the pine needles were disturbed, subtle scuff marks like someone had knelt there. And near the edge of the trail, a stake had been hammered into the soil with a strip of fluorescent ribbon tied around it. Ethan stared at it. That ribbon hadn't been there last night. "Okay," he said softly, voice flat. "So someone's marking." He stepped to the side, testing the soil with the toe of his boot, careful not to put his weight where Shadow refused. The ground felt solid where he stood, but the vibration was faintly present again, more noticeable now that he wasn't dismissing it as imagination. Shadow moved around him, nose close to the earth, tracing an invisible line across the slope. He stopped at another ribbon marker, then another, each one aligned like a breadcrumb trail leading toward the sealed bulkhead. Ethan's eyes narrowed. This wasn't random surveying. Someone had already identified points of interest. He advanced carefully, staying just behind Shadow's line, letting the dog choose the safe path. When they reached the tunnel mouth, Ethan swept his flashlight along the concrete wall. Same reinforcement, same no trespassing signage, except now one of the signs had a fresh sticker slapped over the bottom, redevelopment authorization, site clearance. Ethan's jaw tightened. He crouched, shining the light along the seam where concrete met rock. Something metallic caught the beam, small, half buried. Ethan reached with 2 fingers and pulled it free. A sensor tag. black plastic, weather-sealed, with a company label, Northridge Development Partners. So Northridge was already here, quietly, before the official start date. Shadow's head lifted sharply. Ethan felt it too, a deeper pulse underfoot, like the mountain had answered Shadow's attention. Shadow took one step forward, then stopped so hard the line tightened. Ethan froze. A faint crack echoed, tiny, like the snap of a dry twig. But it came from below, not above. Ethan's mouth went dry. He backed up one step, two, slow and deliberate, keeping his weight spread evenly. Shadow didn't move until Ethan moved, mirroring him perfectly. And when they were 10 feet back from the tunnel mouth, the vibration faded again. Ethan exhaled through his nose. "Good call," he whispered to Shadow. Shadow didn't look for praise. He just kept watching the ground like it might change its mind and open. By the time Ethan returned to the cruiser, his phone buzzed with a text from Reed. "Reed, schedule moved up. Test work started today. Supervisor name on paperwork, =, Caldwell. They're already staging equipment." Ethan stared at the message. Caldwell. He didn't recognize the name, but he recognized the shape of the strategy. Move fast, establish work in progress, create momentum so stopping you looks like obstruction instead of safety. Ethan typed back. "Ethan, need staging location. Photos if you can get them without being seen. And find out who signed the override." Reed's response came quick. "Reed, got it. Also, Captain Hayes is asking why you're sniffing around county records this morning." Ethan's fingers paused. So Hayes already knew he'd moved. Of course she did. She noticed patterns, too. Ethan stared at the mountain through the windshield. He could call Hayes now, tell her everything, hand it over. But he didn't have the one thing she needed. Not just suspicion, proof. He started the engine, pulled back onto the road, and drove toward the only place that could turn scattered clues into something official. Lena's world. The lab. Dr. Lena Moore's office still existed. That was the strange part about losing someone. How the world kept the outlines of their life intact for a while, like an empty house that still held their smell. The university building was a block of concrete and glass that tried to look modern but felt like a bunker. Ethan parked in a visitor spot, then sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. He hadn't been back here since the memorial. He hated this place because it reminded him she had a life he didn't fully see. He needed this place because it might explain why her name was on that redevelopment notice. Shadow sat quiet, sensing the tension but not feeding it. Ethan got out, clipped Shadow's vest, K9 unit patch visible, and walked inside. The receptionist blinked at the dog, then at Ethan. "Can I help you?" "I need access to Dr. Moore's archived work files," Ethan said. Her eyes shifted, cautious. "Are you family?" Ethan's throat tightened. "I'm her husband." The word felt heavy, like it had edges. A pause. Then the receptionist softened slightly. I'm sorry. I didn't know." Most people didn't. They didn't know because the world had moved on the day after the funeral. Ethan kept his tone flat. "Is there a department administrator?" A middle-aged woman with a badge lanyard appeared after a minute, polite but guarded. Ethan explained what he needed, showing the redevelopment notice with Lena's name. The administrator's eyebrows lifted. "That's odd." "Agreed," Ethan said. She hesitated, then motioned him down a hallway. Lena's office door was locked, but the administrator had a key. She opened it with a click that sounded too loud. The air inside was stale, not decayed, just unused. Books lined the shelves in careful chaos, engineering texts, environmental systems, old binders labeled in Lena's precise handwriting. A mug sat on the desk, empty, like it was waiting. Ethan stood in the doorway, chest tight. Shadow stepped in and paused, nose lifting slightly, as if the dog recognized the scent of a person who was no longer here. Ethan swallowed. "I won't be long," he told the administrator. She nodded, backing out and closing the door behind them, leaving Ethan and Shadow alone in Lena's space. Ethan moved to the filing cabinet. Drawers were labeled by project. Most were academic. Then he found one folder with no project title, just a date range and the word Ridgeway. Ethan's fingers froze. He pulled the folder free, set it on the desk, and opened it. Inside were printouts of thermal models, airflow simulations, and annotated maps of the mountain transit line. Lena's handwriting in the margins, tight, angled, thoughtful. Ethan's heart hammered slowly, like a drum far away. She'd been working on Ridgeway. For how long? He flipped through pages until he found a sticky note clipped to an old report. If they stabilize with blasting, it's over. Containment fails. Ethan stared at the words. Containment. That word didn't belong to transit tunnels. Containment belonged to chemical spills, radiation, pressure pockets, things you didn't want escaping. He turned the page and found another note. They'll call it redevelopment. It's extraction. Extraction. Ethan's jaw clenched. Shadow made a low sound. Quiet, not warning, more like acknowledgement. Ethan looked down. You knew she was here, he murmured. Shadow's ears flicked, as if the dog was saying, I know what matters. Ethan searched the folder for anything explicit, a memo, an official complaint, a paper trail. Most of it was analysis, models, risk assessments. Then he found a single envelope wedged between pages. It wasn't sealed. It had Ethan's name on it, written in Lena's hand. His hands went numb. He stared at it for a long moment, the way you stare at a door you're afraid to open because you don't know what kind of room is on the other side. Then he slid his finger under the flap and pulled out the letter. One page. Lena's handwriting was steady. Ethan, if you're reading this, you already found Ridgeway again. I'm sorry, not for what I did, but for what I couldn't tell you. Some systems don't forgive honesty. They punish it. Ridgeway isn't just a tunnel. It's a lid. Under that mountain is a pressure pocket that never fully settled after the original cut. They built the transit line as a cover and then learned the truth too late. The mountain isn't stable. It's managed. There's an old containment design built into the structure, airflow control, thermal regulation, and a sealed maintenance cavity with the last cleaned schematics. If redevelopment gets approved, they'll drill and blast. They'll call it safety. But it will trigger a collapse that won't just take the site. It will take the slope, the lower road, maybe homes. I tried to push it through the right channels. I failed. If I'm gone and they come back, it means someone waited. And it means you're the only person I trust to pay attention. Trust Shadow. He will hear what people can't. Don't fight them with anger. Fight them with proof. Ethan's vision blurred, not from tears. From the sudden, crushing clarity that Lena had been carrying something heavy while Ethan was still learning how to exist beside his own ghosts. He sat down slowly in her chair, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. Shadow stepped closer and pressed his shoulder against Ethan's knee. Firm, steady, grounding. Ethan's voice came out hoarse. You were trying to protect me. He stared at the desk, at the neat stacks, the controlled chaos of Lena's mind. She thought I'd break, he whispered to Shadow, so she carried it alone. Shadow's tail thumped once, quiet. Ethan folded the letter carefully, like it was evidence in Scripture at the same time. Containment, pressure pocket, managed mountain. Ethan had worked enough disaster scenes to understand what happened when people treated geology like a suggestion. And now Northridge wanted to stabilize the site with demolition. They weren't fixing it. They were breaking the lid. Ethan stood. He didn't feel calm now. He felt aligned. That was different. He gathered the Ridgeway folder, tucked Lena's letter into his inner pocket, and left the office with Shadow at his side. The administrator met him in the hallway, eyes searching his face. Ethan didn't offer emotion. He offered fact. Dr. Moore's work indicates demolition could trigger catastrophic slope failure, Ethan said. I need this escalated immediately. The administrator swallowed. To who? Ethan's voice hardened. To Captain Maria Hayes. Hayes picked up on the first ring. Cole, she said, tone already tired. Captain, Ethan replied, I have proof. A pause. Microseconds of silence as Hayes recalibrated. Where are you? University, Ethan said. Dr. Moore kept a Ridgeway file, risk assessments, containment notes. She wrote me a letter. Hayes's voice dropped. Ethan, I know, he said, cutting in before the concern could become an order. But this isn't personal. It's structural. Northridge moved the schedule up. They're already staging equipment. Hayes exhaled, controlled. Send me everything, now. I will, Ethan said, but I'm going back up there, today. Hayes's voice sharpened. No, you will not. Ethan stared at the road ahead through the windshield of his cruiser. the city sliding past in indifferent daylight. "Captain," he said quietly, "I was there this morning. They've marked the ground. There was subsidence noise. Shadow won't let me step near the seal." Hayes went silent. Finally she spoke. "Okay, listen carefully. If you go, you do it within policy. You bring Reed. You do not confront anyone alone. You observe, document, and you back out the moment you see instability." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Understood. And Ethan," Hayes added, voice softer now, "I'm sorry about Lena, but don't let grief drive the wheel." Ethan swallowed. "It won't," he said. "It would be something else. Responsibility." Deputy Lucas Reed met Ethan at the base of the Ridgeway Access Road. Reed was younger, late 20s, with the energetic competence of someone who still believed effort could solve everything if you applied it hard enough. He wore his uniform like it was armor he hadn't learned to relax in yet. When he saw Ethan's face, his expression sobered. "Sir," Reed said, "I got photos." He handed Ethan his phone. Images of heavy equipment staged on a lower service road, drilling rig, flatbeds, stacked concrete barriers, workers in reflective vests, a temporary office trailer with Northridge branding, and in one photo, taken from far back, an orange sign, "Blasting test, authorized personnel only." Ethan's stomach went cold. Reed's voice dropped. "They're planning charges." Ethan nodded once, feeling the outline of the next hours forming like a map. Shadow stood between them, calm but alert, reading the wind. "We're not going in blind," Ethan said. "We observe, we document. We look for the supervisor." Reed nodded, swallowing his nerves. "Yes, sir." They walked down toward the staging area along the edge of the service road, staying visible, police presence, not trespassers. Ethan's badge and Shadow's vest made it clear they weren't hikers with opinions. They were authority. A man spotted them and approached, posture relaxed but guarded. He was clean-shaven, mid-40s, with the polished confidence of someone who'd spent years talking his way past objections. Hard hat, clipboard. "Officer," the man said, smiling like this was inconvenient but manageable. "Can I help you?" Ethan met his gaze. "You, Caldwell?" The man's smile tightened. "Caleb Caldwell, yes." Ethan's voice stayed calm. "Officer Ethan Cole. This is Deputy Reed. And K-9 Shadow." Caldwell's eyes flicked to Shadow, then back. "Beautiful dog." Shadow didn't react, didn't posture. Just watched, ears slightly forward, silent communication humming in his body. Ethan held up the redevelopment notice printout. "Your schedule moved up." Caldwell shrugged lightly. "We have flexibility." "You're planning blasting tests," Ethan said, nodding toward the orange sign. Caldwell's smile faded by a fraction. "Standard procedure." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "On a sealed mountain transit structure with documented instability reports?" Caldwell's posture shifted, subtle irritation surfacing beneath the professional veneer. "We're operating under permit." "Permits don't change geology," Ethan replied. Caldwell's jaw tightened. "We have engineers." Ethan's voice stayed flat. "So did the original project." For the first time, Caldwell's eyes sharpened. "You know about that?" Ethan didn't answer directly. "I'm requesting your current risk assessment documents and your geotechnical review." Caldwell's smile returned, thinner now. "You can request whatever you want through county channels. We're not obligated to hand over proprietary documents to—" He glanced at Reed, then back at Ethan. "A patrol unit." Ethan held his gaze. "Then we'll observe your work." Caldwell's smile hardened. "You can watch from outside the exclusion zone." Ethan nodded. "We will." Shadow's ears flicked sharply. Ethan felt it a second later, the ground underfoot faintly pulsing again. Not dramatic, just enough. Shadow's head snapped toward the slope above the sealed tunnel line. His body stiffened. Reed noticed. Shadow okay?" Ethan's voice dropped. "He's hearing something." Caldwell glanced around, annoyed. "Look, officer, if you're here to scare my crew with ghost stories." A sharp crack cut through the air. It sounded like a rifle shot. Everyone froze. Then the ground shifted under Ethan's boots. Not a quake, not a tremor, but a sudden, sickening give, like the earth had exhaled and forgotten to inhale again. Shadow lunged. Teeth caught the back of Ethan's jacket, yanking him hard to the side. Ethan's body reacted before his mind could catch up, rolling with the pull, weight shifting off the spot he'd been standing. The soil where Ethan had been collapsed inward with a grinding sound, rocks sliding, dirt pouring into a shallow sinkhole that widened in seconds. Reed swore and jumped back. Caldwell's face went pale. Men shouted. Someone killed the rig. Ethan hit the ground hard, shoulders slamming into gravel, breath knocked from his lungs. Shadow stood over him, legs braced, body a barrier between Ethan and the collapsing edge. Ethan sucked in air, forcing himself upright. Reed grabbed his arm. "Sir, are you—" "I'm fine," Ethan rasped, eyes locked on the sinkhole. The hole wasn't deep, maybe 6 feet, but it wasn't done. Soil kept sliding, widening like a mouth. Caldwell stared at it, jaw clenched. No one should have been standing there. Ethan pushed to his feet, brushing grit off his uniform. No one should have been drilling anywhere near here. Shadow's low warning rumble vibrated deep, not aggression, alarm. Ethan looked at the crew. "Back up, all of you, move." Reed echoed him. "Back up, now." The workers scrambled, suddenly respectful of the fact that mountains didn't negotiate. Caldwell swallowed hard, trying to regain control. "Shut everything down," he snapped to his crew. "Kill the operation, clear the area." Ethan stepped closer to Caldwell, voice quiet but lethal. "You just got your risk assessment," he said, "in real time." Caldwell's eyes flickered with something that wasn't fear. It was calculation. The incident wasn't just a danger, it was liability. He looked at Ethan, then at Shadow, then at the sinkhole again. "Work's suspended pending review," Caldwell said stiffly. "We'll file the report." Ethan held his gaze. "You do that." Reed breathed out shakily, eyes wide. "Shadow just saved you." Ethan didn't look away from Caldwell. "He listens," Ethan said. Shadow's ears remained locked on the mountain, as if the dog knew the collapse wasn't finished with its warnings. Ethan's radio crackled. Hayes' voice. "Unit 12, Ethan, status?" Ethan keyed the mic, eyes on the sinkhole. "Captain, we have active subsidence at the Ridgeway site. Near-miss injury prevented by K9. Northridge staging includes blasting test signage. I'm requesting immediate county inspection and full suspension order." A pause. Then Hayes' voice sharpened. "Copy. Pull back. Do not re-enter the area." Ethan's eyes stayed cold. "We're backing out now." As he turned, Shadow moved with him, staying tight to Ethan's leg, silent, loyal, expressive in the one way that mattered, keeping him alive. They didn't leave Ridgeway like people who'd won. They left like people who'd just seen the ground open its mouth and realized how thin the rules really were. Ethan kept his pace steady as he and Reed moved up the service road, away from the sinkhole, away from the bright vests and machinery, and the way Caldwell's eyes had already started converting danger into paperwork strategy. Shadow stayed close, tight heel position, shoulders aligned with Ethan's knee, head angled slightly toward the slope as if keeping one ear on the mountain and one ear on the humans pretending they controlled it. Reed's hands trembled a little as he fumbled his phone into his pocket. "Sir?" he said under his breath. Later," Ethan replied, not unkindly. "Breathe now." Reed nodded, sucking in air like he'd forgotten it belonged to him. They reached the cruiser. Ethan opened the back door and guided Shadow into his kennel space for a moment, not because he wanted the dog contained, but because he needed to think, and Shadow's presence in the front seat would keep pulling Ethan's attention back to the mountain. Shadow stepped in without fuss, eyes never leaving Ethan's face. Trust. Ethan closed the door gently and leaned against the car. For a few seconds, he just listened. No hum now, no vibration, only the distant murmur of the crew and the wind finally stirring through the pines like it had been waiting for permission. Reed swallowed. "That hole, it happened so fast." Ethan nodded once. "That's the point." Reed frowned. "The point?" Ethan looked back down the road where the sinkhole had opened. "Mountains don't escalate for drama," he said. "They escalate because pressure finally finds a path." Reed stared, trying to process the way Ethan talked about geology like it was an enemy combatant. Ethan continued, voice low and controlled. "And if Northridge is planning charges, they're about to give that pressure a bigger path." Reed's eyes widened. "So what do we do?" Ethan pulled Lena's folder from his bag. The paper edges were slightly bent now, like they'd been carried through urgency, not neatly filed in a cabinet. He tapped it against his palm. "We make it impossible for them to pretend they didn't know." Reed nodded quickly. "Captain Hayes is calling county inspection." "Good," Ethan said, "but an inspection is a moment. Northridge will try to outlast it." Reed's eyebrows knit. "Then we need more?" Ethan's gaze sharpened. "We need classification." Reed blinked. "Like zoning? Like legal identity," Ethan said. "If Ridgeway is recognized as protected critical infrastructure, historical engineering, containment design, anything, demolition becomes illegal, not just risky." Reed's mouth parted slightly. "How do we prove that?" Ethan stared down the slope. "We already have the beginning." He held up Lena's folder. "She modeled it. She called it a lid. We've got evidence of active instability today, and we have the one thing engineers respect when their egos aren't enough." Reed waited. Ethan's voice stayed flat. Failure. He opened the cruiser trunk, pulled out a small field kit, and started organizing like a man who didn't believe in miracles, only documentation. He handed Reed a clipboard. "You're with me. We map everything Shadow refused to cross, every marker they placed, every seam line near the seal. We photograph. We timestamp. We record coordinates." Reed nodded. "Yes, sir." Ethan glanced at the kennel window where Shadow's amber eyes watched him. "And Shadow is the censor we treat like a witness." Reed swallowed again, then gave a shaky half-smile. "Okay, K9 witness. Got it." Ethan opened the back door. Shadow stepped out, shook once, then immediately locked onto Ethan, awaiting instruction. Ethan clipped the long line again and crouched. He didn't pet Shadow. He pressed his forehead lightly against the dog's for a brief second, an old habit between them, not sentimental, synchronizing. "Show me," Ethan whispered. Shadow's ears flicked, and they went back in. They stayed outside the exclusion zone like Caldwell ordered, but Ethan understood something Caldwell didn't. You didn't need to cross a line to read what was happening. You just needed to pay attention. Shadow moved first, tracing the edge where the soil changed texture. He paused at each fluorescent ribbon marker and looked up at Ethan, then back down, silent communication that said, "This matters." Ethan photographed each marker, then knelt beside it, careful to keep his weight distributed. Reed recorded coordinates, voice steadying as the task gave him something concrete to hold. "Marker 1, 34.112. Okay, marker 2. Ethan watched the terrain. The slope above the sealed tunnel had subtle depressions, a pattern like ripples frozen mid-motion. Not natural. The mountain had been cut and filled and layered over decades. The soil was a patchwork quilt stitched with human arrogance. Shadow stopped suddenly, nose down, then took 2 steps backward. Ethan halted. Reed nearly walked into Ethan's back. "Sir?" Ethan held up a hand, eyes locked on Shadow. Shadow's body stiffened, ears high. Then Ethan felt it, a faint pulse underfoot, like the earth flexing a muscle. Ethan's voice dropped. "Back 2 steps." Reed obeyed instantly. The pulse faded again. Shadow exhaled and moved forward along a different line, guiding them around the spot. Reed's eyes were wide. He's literally picking the safe route." Ethan nodded, continuing to document without drama. "He's reading vibration patterns we don't feel until it's too late." They finished the perimeter documentation in 40 minutes. By then, Caldwell's crew had mostly withdrawn from the immediate sinkhole area, but the equipment remained staged, like a threat that hadn't decided whether to speak. Caldwell himself stood near the trailer, phone pressed to his ear, posture tense. He glanced at Ethan once, eyes hard, then looked away. Ethan knew that look. That wasn't fear. That was, "I'm calling people above you." Good, Ethan thought. Call them. Bring them into the daylight. The county inspector arrived just after noon. A single SUV climbed the access road, tires crunching on gravel, headlights off like it was trying to look casual. Laura Penfield stepped out. She was mid-50s, compact, solid, iron-gray hair cut close to her head, like she didn't have time to maintain softness. Her face looked like it had been carved by years of telling contractors no while they tried to smile her into yes. She wore a thick coat, a clipboard, and an expression that said she'd already decided she didn't like anyone here. Ethan approached with Reed at his side, Shadow in heel position. Penfield's eyes flicked to Shadow. "Dog," Ethan nodded. K9 Shadow. Penfield grunted. At least someone here has instincts. Caldwell approached with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Inspector Penfield, thank you for coming on such short notice. Penfield didn't smile back. You almost killed someone, she said, looking past him toward the sinkhole. Short notice is what you get when the mountain starts talking. Caldwell's jaw tightened. We followed procedure. Unexpected subsidence. Penfield cut him off with a look. Unexpected is what people say when they didn't look hard enough. Ethan held out Lena's folder. Inspector, Dr. Lena Moore ran analysis on Ridgeway. Her work suggests the site functions as containment for a pressure pocket beneath the mountain. Demolition, especially blasting, risks catastrophic slope failure. Penfield's eyebrows lifted by a fraction. Containment, she repeated, voice flat. That's a loaded word. Ethan met her gaze. It's the word Dr. Moore used. Penfield took the folder, flipping through pages quickly, eyes scanning. She stopped on Lena's sticky note, lips tightening. Caldwell leaned in. Inspector, those are private academic materials, not certified engineering reports. Penfield didn't look up. Then you should have brought certified engineering reports that prove she's wrong, she said. Did you? Caldwell hesitated. Penfield's eyes lifted slowly. Did you? Caldwell's smile slipped. Our geotechnical review is still in progress. Penfield nodded once. Of course it is. She handed the folder back to Ethan. Show me the site. Ethan led her along the perimeter, staying outside the exclusion zone. He pointed to the marker ribbons. These are Northridge's placements. They're mapping subsurface interest points. Penfield crouched, studying one. Fresh. Reed offered coordinates and photos, voice gaining confidence. Penfield listened without interrupting. Shadow moved slightly ahead, nose down, ears scanning. Penfield noticed. Your dog is working, she said. He's reading ground vibration, Ethan replied. He refused to approach the seal last night and again this morning. He pulled me away seconds before subsidence. Penfield's eyes narrowed. Dogs can feel vibrations humans miss, she said, almost to herself. Then she stood, looking at the sinkhole. Bring me closer, she said. Ethan's stomach tightened. Inspector, the ground is unstable. Penfield's expression hardened. So is every political decision in my office. I still have to walk into those rooms. She stepped forward. Shadow immediately stiffened. Ethan's voice sharpened. Stop! Penfield paused mid-step, eyes flicking to Ethan. Excuse me? Ethan pointed to Shadow. He's locking. That means the ground is shifting. Penfield looked at the dog. Shadow's body was rigid, ears forward, tail still. Not aggressive, not afraid, alert. Penfield stared for a long moment, then slowly stepped back. The tension in Shadow's shoulders eased slightly. Penfield's mouth tightened. All right, she said quietly. We do it your way. Caldwell's face flushed with irritation. Inspector! Penfield snapped her head toward him. If your ego needs to walk closer, Caldwell, do it yourself, she said. But don't use my body as your prop. Caldwell shut his mouth. Penfield turned back to Ethan. What's your claim? Ethan's voice stayed even. This site isn't a demolition project. It's a managed system. The seal, the thermal design, the airflow channels, Dr. Moore believed they were built to keep a pressure pocket stable. If Northridge introduces shock, blasting, drilling, they could trigger a cascade collapse that takes the slope and anyone working it. Penfield's eyes sharpened. And you can prove that? Ethan held up his camera. We have real-time subsidence documented today, he said. We have permit gaps and inspection gaps in county records. We have Dr. Moore's analysis, and we have the safest witness in this mountain. He nodded to Shadow. Penfield watched Shadow for a beat, then made a decision. I'm issuing an immediate stop work recommendation, she said. Temporary suspension pending full geotechnical review and classification reassessment. Caldwell's eyes widened. You can't... Penfield cut him off. Watch me. She turned and walked toward her SUV, already pulling out her phone. Her posture was solid, purposeful, like she'd been waiting for an excuse to finally slam a door on someone's half-truths. Ethan exhaled slowly. Not relief, just the next step. Reed let out a shaky laugh. We did it? Ethan shook his head. We started, he said. Shadow's ears flicked again, gaze lifting toward the mountain slope. Ethan followed the look. The trees swayed slightly, not from wind, from something deeper, a subtle settling like a giant shifting in its sleep. Ethan's voice dropped. "We don't celebrate yet." Reed's smile faded. "Why?" Ethan didn't look away. "Because the mountain hasn't finished talking," he said, "and Northridge hasn't finished trying." That afternoon, Hayes arrived. Not in uniform. In a heavy coat, hair tied back, face set in the expression she wore when she walked into rooms where people tried to bend reality. She stepped out of her car, eyes immediately moving from Ethan to the sinkhole to Caldwell's crew. When she reached Ethan, her voice was low. "You okay?" Ethan nodded. "Shadow pulled me away." Hayes glanced at the dog. "Good boy," she said quietly. Shadow's tail thumped once. Hayes turned her attention to Penfield, who was standing with her clipboard near the SUV, phone tucked away now like she'd already fired her first shot. Hayes introduced herself. They spoke for several minutes, quiet, deliberate, words like liability, classification, state review, immediate suspension. Ethan stayed back, letting Hayes handle the politics. That was what Hayes did. She fought systems with the only weapon systems respected: documentation, procedure, and the kind of calm authority that made people nervous. When Hayes returned, her eyes were sharp. "Penfield's issuing a stop work order recommendation, but Northridge will appeal," she said. "They'll argue it's temporary. They'll push for quick review. They'll try to frame you as emotional." Ethan's jaw tightened. "They can try." Hayes studied him. "Ethan, tell me the truth. Is this about Lena?" Ethan held her gaze. "It started there," he said, "but it's not staying there." Hayes's expression softened slightly. "Good," she said, "because if it becomes personal, you lose." Ethan nodded once. "Then we make it structural." Hayes exhaled. "Exactly." She looked toward the mountain, then back at Ethan. "Go home tonight," she ordered. "You've done what you can today." Ethan wanted to refuse, but he didn't, because refusing would feel like control, and control was the lie that got people killed. "Okay," he said. Hayes's eyes flicked to Shadow. "And you," she murmured. "Keep him alive." Shadow blinked slowly, as if he understood the assignment better than anyone. That night, Ethan sat at his kitchen table with Lena's folders spread out, photographs and coordinates beside it, Reed's notes stacked neatly. Shadow lay at his feet, eyes half closed, but ears alive. Ethan didn't drink. He didn't eat. He just worked. He overlaid Lena's analysis maps with the marker coordinates. The pattern emerged. The ribbons weren't random. They traced the ridgeline above the sealed tunnel and skirted a section Lena had flagged as high-risk void. Ethan's chest tightened. Northridge wasn't just planning demolition. They were targeting the weak points, which meant either they were ignorant and dangerously confident, or they knew exactly what they were doing. Ethan's phone buzzed. A message from Reed. "Reed, heard talk at staging area. Caldwell's pushing for emergency stabilization. They might try to move before order finalized." Ethan's spine went cold. Emergency stabilization was the perfect phrase. It sounded responsible. It sounded urgent. It sounded like you had no choice. It was also the kind of phrase you used when you wanted to act before anyone could stop you. Ethan stared at the message, then at Shadow. Shadow's eyes were open now, watching Ethan like he could see the decision forming. Ethan whispered, "They're going to rush it." Shadow rose slowly, walking to the window, staring out into the night. His ears angled toward the north, toward Ridgeway. Ethan's hands tightened into fists, then relaxed. He remembered Lena's letter. Don't fight them with anger. Fight them with proof. He already had proof. But proof didn't matter if the mountain collapsed before anyone finished reading. Ethan stood, grabbed his jacket. Shadow moved to the door instantly. Ethan didn't call Hayes, not because he wanted to hide, because Hayes would order him to wait. And waiting was what Northridge was counting on. Ethan grabbed his keys, then paused. He pulled out his radio and keyed the channel. "Dispatch," he said. "Static then. Go ahead, Unit 12. Ethan's voice was controlled. "I'm returning to Ridgeway for observation due to credible risk of premature demolition activity. Notify Captain Hayes." A pause, then, "Copy, Unit 12. Ethan clipped Shadow's harness, looked down at the dog. "Same rules," he whispered. "We observe, we document, we don't die." Shadow's tail gave a single controlled sweep. and they went back into the mountains dark. The mountain at night didn't feel hostile. That was the lie that made it dangerous. Ethan drove without headlights for the last stretch, letting moonlight and memory guide him, easing the cruiser into a turnout just short of the Ridgeway access road. He shut off the engine and sat in the dark, listening. Shadow sat upright in the passenger seat, posture different now, leaned forward, muscles awake, ears angled toward a sound Ethan couldn't hear yet. Ethan waited. There it was. A low mechanical hum, distant but persistent, like a giant insect working its mandibles into stone. They didn't wait, Ethan murmured. Shadow didn't look at him. He was already focused, already mapping. Ethan stepped out, the cold biting through his jacket. He clipped the long line again and let Shadow lead them along the tree line, staying off the road, boots sinking softly into damp earth. Ahead, the Ridgeway site glowed with temporary floodlights. Trucks idled. The drilling rig loomed like a patient predator, and near the sealed tunnel, new activity. Men moved with purpose. Equipment had been repositioned. A small portable generator throbbed beside a metal case Ethan recognized instantly. Blasting caps. Ethan's pulse stayed steady. Fear was useless now. Information mattered. He raised his camera and zoomed in, snapping photos, time-stamped, geotagged, undeniable. Shadow halted abruptly. Ethan stopped with him, crouching instinctively. Shadow's body had gone rigid again, but this time something was different. His ears weren't just forward, they were rotating, tracking multiple vibrations like overlapping waves colliding beneath the surface. Ethan felt it a second later, a trembling not underfoot, but in his chest, as if the air itself had grown heavier. "Okay," Ethan whispered, "that's new." Shadow took one careful step backward, then another. He turned his head slightly and looked at Ethan. Direct eye contact. A command, not a request. Now. Ethan didn't argue. He backed away with Shadow, keeping low, retreating toward the trees. And then it happened. A deep thud rolled through the mountain. Not an explosion, not yet, but a test vibration. A pressure probe. The ground rippled. Not visibly, but the floodlights flickered, and one of the trucks rocked slightly on its suspension. Men shouted. Someone laughed nervously. Shadow let out a low sound that vibrated through Ethan's bones. Ethan ducked behind a fallen log, heart finally hammering. That wasn't a blast, he breathed. That was them knocking. Shadow's body was coiled tight, eyes locked on the slope above the tunnel seal. Ethan followed his gaze. A hairline crack had formed in the soil, barely visible, running diagonally down toward the sealed structure like a warning written too small to read unless you were looking for it. Ethan raised the camera, zoomed in, snapped photos. Then another vibration hit. Stronger. The crack widened. Dirt trickled downward in a thin, silent stream. Ethan's radio crackled softly against his chest. Hayes's voice, tense. "Ethan, where are you?" Ethan keyed the mic without looking away. "On the ridge. They're conducting subsurface tests. No blast yet, but pressure probes are destabilizing the slope." Hayes's voice sharpened. "You need to pull out, now." "Not yet," Ethan said. "If they fire a charge, the slope fails." A pause. Then quietly, "Do you have proof?" Ethan's eyes stayed on the crack. "Yes." "Send it." Ethan transmitted photos and video in rapid bursts, trusting the system to do its job. Shadow suddenly lunged, not forward, but sideways, yanking Ethan hard behind the log as another vibration rolled through. The ground where Ethan's head had been a second earlier collapsed inward with a soft, horrifying shush. Ethan slammed into the dirt, breath knocked from him. Shadow stood over him, legs braced, body a living shield. Ethan sucked in air, eyes wide. "That was the warning," he whispered. "The next one won't be." Hayes's voice came back tight. "County inspector is issuing emergency suspension. State geotech is en route." Ethan's jaw clenched. "They won't wait." "I know," Hayes said. "And Ethan, listen to me. If this turns into an evacuation scenario, you get people out. You do not try to stop equipment with your body." Ethan didn't answer immediately. Because Shadow was moving again, the dog had turned away from the site and was pulling, not toward safety for himself, but toward the service road where the crew was gathered. Ethan's mind snapped into focus. "They don't know," he said. "They think this is contained." Hayes inhaled sharply. "Ethan, I can get them out, Ethan said, shadows reading a collapse path. Hayes was silent for a heartbeat too long. Then, if you do this, it's evacuation only. No confrontation. Ethan was already moving. Understood. He broke cover, sprinting toward the service road, Shadow at full stride beside him, barking now, not aggressive, but sharp, commanding. Men turned, startled. Caldwell looked up, irritation flashing. Then he felt it. The ground shifted. Ethan shouted, voice cutting through engine noise, "Everyone off the slope! Now!" Caldwell scowled. "Officer, you're interfering." Another crack split the air, louder this time. The soil beneath the rig sagged visibly. Shadow lunged forward, barking again, body angled toward the safe route downhill. Ethan grabbed Caldwell's arm. "Move!" For a split second, Caldwell hesitated, ego battling instinct. Then the ground answered for him. The slope gave way in a sudden rolling collapse, not a catastrophic avalanche, but a fast-moving slide of dirt and rock that swallowed equipment and chewed into the service road. Men screamed. Ethan shoved Caldwell hard, sending him stumbling toward solid ground. "Run!" Shadow darted between workers, hurting them instinctively, snapping at the air near legs that froze too long, forcing motion. The drilling rig tipped, metal screaming as it slid sideways into the forming sink. A truck's rear wheels vanished. The blast case toppled, skidding harmlessly away as the ground beneath it disappeared. Ethan felt hands grab his vest. Reed, breathless, eyes wild. "Sir, Shadow, what?" "No time," Ethan yelled. "Downhill!" They ran. Behind them, the mountain roared, not in anger, but in release. When it stopped, the slope was transformed. Equipment lay half buried. The sealed tunnel entrance was still intact, but the land above it had slumped, redistributing pressure in a way Lena's models had predicted. The lid had flexed, but it hadn't broken. Silence fell, thick and stunned. Men stood shaking, staring at what almost killed them. Caldwell sank to his knees, helmet askew, face gray. Shadow stood at the edge of the safe zone, chest heaving, eyes still locked on the mountain until finally his posture eased. Ethan bent over, hands on his thighs, lungs burning. Hayes's voice came through the radio, barely containing relief. "Ethan?" "We're clear," Ethan said. "No fatalities. Site compromised. Equipment lost." A pause. Then Hayes said quietly, "You just saved lives." Ethan looked at Shadow. "No," he replied. He did. The aftermath came fast. Emergency lights, state geotechnical teams, county officials who suddenly cared very much about paperwork they'd ignored for years. The Ridgeway site was cordoned off, reclassified within hours as unstable critical infrastructure pending full federal review. Caldwell was escorted away, not arrested, but finished. Penfield arrived again, eyes sharp, clipboard forgotten. She surveyed the damage, then turned to Ethan. "You were right," she said simply. Ethan nodded. "So was Dr. Moore." Penfield's gaze softened. "We'll cite her work. Officially." Ethan swallowed. "Thank you." Hayes pulled Ethan aside near the cruiser as dawn began to gray the sky. "You broke protocol," she said. Ethan didn't argue. "Yes, ma'am." Hayes studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "You also prevented a disaster." She glanced at Shadow, who sat calmly, tongue lolling slightly, exhaustion finally reaching him. "And you had a K9 that read the mountain better than any instrument we have." Ethan met her gaze. Lena trusted him. Hayes nodded slowly. "Then we will too." She placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, not official, not disciplinary, support. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," she said. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest, not grief leaving, but weight redistributing. By the time the sun crested the ridge, the mountain looked peaceful again, deceptively so. Shadow lay in the grass near the cruiser, finally resting, paws twitching slightly in sleep. Ethan sat on the bumper, watching light move across the scarred slope. The Ridgeway site would be studied now, protected, managed properly, not erased. Hayes approached one last time. "They're offering you commendation," she said. "Formal recognition." Ethan shook his head. "Not necessary." Hayes smiled faintly. "Figures?" She hesitated. "What are you going to do?" Ethan looked at Shadow, then back at the mountain. "Stay involved," he said. "Make sure the right people keep listening." Hayes nodded. "Good." As she walked away, Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out Lena's letter, edges worn now from being carried close to his heart. He read the last line again. Trust Shadow. He will hear what people can't. Ethan folded the letter and slipped it back into his pocket. Shadow stirred, opened one amber eye, and looked at him. Ethan smiled, just a little. Yeah, he murmured, you were right. The mountain held, and for the first time since Lena died, Ethan felt something like balance. Not happiness, not closure, stability. Morning didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, light seeping into the mountain, like permission rather than conquest. Steam rose from damp soil where cold night air met earth still warm from movement below, and the trees along the ridge stood quiet, as if listening for whatever came next. Ethan stayed, not because anyone ordered him to, because leaving too quickly felt like abandoning a conversation that wasn't finished. Shadow lay stretched beside the cruiser now, no longer coiled for action. His breathing was deep, steady, the sleep of a working dog who had done exactly what he was built to do and trusted the world to hold for a few hours. Ethan watched the mountain while the emergency crews rotated through in methodical waves. State geotechnical engineers set up sensors. County officials argued quietly over jurisdiction. Northridge's equipment sat half-buried, useless and expensive, the clearest language corporations ever seemed to understand. No one looked at Ethan like a hero. They looked at him like a problem they didn't quite know how to file. Which was fine. Heroes got celebrated and forgotten. Problems got studied. Captain Maria Hayes returned near mid-morning with fresh coffee and a folder under her arm. She handed Ethan the cup without comment and sat on the hood of the cruiser beside him, eyes on the slope. "You shook a lot of trees last night," she said calmly. Ethan took a sip. "The mountain did most of the shaking." Hayes glanced at him. "State wants a full debrief. Federal interest is coming. They're using words like a legacy infrastructure and containment failure risk." Ethan nodded once. "Good." Hayes studied him sideways. "You realize what this means." "That Ridgeway won't be buried quietly," Ethan said. "That your wife's work won't be buried either," Hayes added. Ethan's grip tightened slightly around the cup. Hayes continued, voice steady but softer now. "They're reclassifying the site. Protected critical structure. No demolition without federal review. Northridge's permits are frozen." Ethan exhaled. Not relief exactly. More like something settling into its proper place. Hayes flipped open the folder. "There's another thing." Ethan waited. "They want you attached to the review team," Hayes said. "Officially. Field liaison. You understand systems. You understand K9 integration. And frankly," she glanced at Shadow, "you understand when to listen." Ethan's eyebrows lifted slightly. "You're offering me a desk." Hayes snorted. "Don't push your luck." He considered it for a moment. Lena had once told him she never trusted people who wanted to erase old systems instead of learning why they were built. This would mean staying close, staying accountable, making sure the truth didn't get diluted into executive summaries that forgot the human cost. "I'll do it," Ethan said finally, "as long as Shadow stays with me." Hayes smiled faintly. "I'd be an idiot to separate you two." Shadow stirred at the sound of his name, lifted his head, blinked once at Ethan, then settled again, content. The weeks that followed reshaped themselves quietly. There were no press conferences, no dramatic speeches, just work. Sensors were installed, airflow patterns mapped, thermal regulations studied. What Lena had suspected became undeniable. Ridgeway wasn't a failed transit project, it was a system. An early imperfect attempt to manage a mountain that refused to behave like a spreadsheet. The sealed tunnel wasn't a mistake, it was a lid, and it had held just barely for decades. Ethan walked the site daily with Shadow, now officially logged as a K9 sensor asset in more than one report. Engineers learned quickly that when Shadow refused to step somewhere, it was cheaper and smarter to listen. Deputy Lucas Reed visited often, no longer breathless, no longer wide-eyed. He watched, learned, asked better questions. One afternoon, Reed stood beside Ethan near the perimeter fence, staring at the slope where the collapse had stopped short of catastrophe. "I didn't know dogs could do that," Reed said quietly. Ethan didn't look away. "Most people don't," he replied. "That's how things get missed." Reed nodded. "You think—" If Shadow hadn't been there, Ethan finished the thought for him. We'd be standing in a memorial zone. Reed swallowed. I'm glad I was there. Ethan finally looked at him. So am I. One evening, long after the emergency lights were gone and the mountain had returned to something like calm, Ethan drove north, past Ridgeway, past the city, into a stretch of road that led to a small, quiet overlook Lena had loved. He parked, stepped out, and let Shadow lead him to the edge. The valley below was washed in late sunlight, gold and shadow stitched together like something ancient and patient. Ethan reached into his jacket and took out Lena's letter. He didn't read it this time. He just held it. I didn't walk away, he said aloud, the words carried gently by the wind. I stayed. Shadow sat beside him, shoulder pressed against Ethan's leg, solid and warm. Ethan understood now what Lena had done. She hadn't left him a solution. She'd left him a responsibility that fit who he already was. Not a man who rushed toward healing, a man who stood where pressure gathered and refused to let it break others. As the sun dipped lower, Ethan felt something unfamiliar settle over him. Not happiness, not closure, something steadier. Balance. Shadow rose, looked back at him, then toward the trail. Time to go. Ethan nodded. Yeah, he said softly. Let's head home. They walked back to the cruiser together, silhouettes moving against the fading light. The mountain held, the system breathed. And Ethan Cole, officer, widower, guardian, stood upright again. Not because the world had become safe, but because he had learned how to listen.